Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you thought you knew about yourself was a lie. What if the world you live in, the people around you, the very teachers who shape your future, had all underestimated you? What would happen if the one thing you could count on, the one thing no one could take away, was your own mind? The classroom was unusually quiet, with only the sound of pencils scratching against paper. It was just another average Monday at Westview High, the kind of day where students shuffled through the motions of another week of mundane lessons. But for Marcus Johnson, this Monday felt different. He could feel it in his bones, the quiet before the storm. Sitting in the back corner of Mrs. Sarah Thompson's classroom, Marcus glanced over at the clock on the wall. The minute hand ticked slowly, each second feeling like an eternity. He tried to focus on the algebra test in front of him, but his mind kept drifting. It wasn't the subject itself. Marcus was no stranger to numbers. In fact, he was far ahead of his classmates, though you'd never know it by looking at him. His pencil hovered over the paper, the tip touching the first question. He knew the answer without even thinking about it, but he paused. In that brief moment, Marcus couldn't help but wonder, what if they were right? What if all those teachers, all those classmates who dismissed him as average, were right? Marcus had always been smart, but not the kind of smart that everyone appreciated. He didn't fit the stereotype of the genius. He wasn't a nerd who stood out in the crowd, or a straight-A student who followed every rule to the letter. He didn't have the perfect handwriting or the best test scores to back up his intellect. In fact, most of the time, Marcus felt like he was just barely getting by, hiding in the shadows of his own potential. But there was something deeper inside of him, something that couldn't be measured by grades or superficial achievements. He had learned long ago that the system wasn't built for people like him, people who didn't have a perfect family background, people who came from the wrong side of the tracks. He had learned to keep his brilliance hidden, buried beneath layers of indifference, a defense mechanism against the constant stream of judgment that came from both teachers and classmates alike. And then there was Mrs. Thompson. Mrs. Sarah Thompson, a teacher who prided herself on her ability to see potential in every student, had already written Marcus off as just another troubled kid. She saw him as someone who didn't quite measure up, someone who might be smart but lacked the drive or focus to do anything with it. When it came to Marcus, Mrs. Thompson simply didn't see the big picture. And he couldn't blame her. He never made it easy to see. But something was different today. Something was about to change. The test in front of Marcus wasn't particularly difficult. The questions were typical for a high school algebra class, solving equations, simplifying expressions, and graphing linear functions. For most of his classmates, these were tricky concepts. For Marcus, they were a walk in the park. As he wrote down the answers, Marcus's thoughts began to wander again, drifting toward the question that had been gnawing at the back of his mind for weeks. What would happen if he stopped hiding? What would happen if he actually let people see how smart he really was? He could tell that something inside him was pushing against the walls he had built. Maybe it was time to stop holding back. Just as the bell rang, signaling the end of the class, Marcus finished his test and turned it in to Mrs. Thompson without a second thought. He didn't expect her to notice. Not really. She never did. Marcus, she called as he reached the door, her voice sharp, almost demanding. He turned around. You know the rules. If you finish early, you need to help out with the others, Mrs. Thompson said, her eyes not quite meeting his. Marcus hesitated for a moment. He had always resented being treated like he wasn't capable of more. But today, he didn't feel like pushing back. He nodded, took his seat again, and watched as the other students struggled through the test. It was only when the last student finally finished, and the class was nearly empty, that Mrs. Thompson called him over. Marcus, can I talk to you for a minute? Sure, he said, walking over to her desk. He was curious now. Mrs. Thompson rarely gave him any attention beyond the occasional reprimand. She looked at the stack of papers in front of her, then back at Marcus. I have to be honest with you, she began, her tone softer now. I don't know what's going on with you lately, but I've noticed that you've been doing better in class. Your test scores are improving. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. Was she actually noticing him for once? Or was this just another attempt to subtly criticize him? I know that you're capable of more, Marcus. You just have to apply yourself, she continued, her voice firm, but still carrying that patronizing undertone. You have potential, but you're wasting it. Marcus bit his lip. He could feel his frustration building, but he forced himself to stay calm. It was hard to hear that kind of thing coming from someone who had never taken the time to really understand him. I'm trying, he said quietly, but maybe I'm just not as good at this stuff as you think. Mrs. Thompson frowned, her eyes scanning him like a puzzle she couldn't quite figure out. I don't think you're not good at it, Marcus. I just think you're not putting in the effort. Her words stung. But in that moment, Marcus realized something. Mrs. Thompson wasn't wrong. He had been hiding. Hiding behind low expectations, hiding behind his own insecurities. Maybe it was time to stop pretending. For the rest of the day, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. He didn't know how or why, but he felt an urgency, a growing sense that the time to prove himself had come. Little did he know, his test results would be the catalyst that would not only shatter the perception others had of him but also lead him down a path of discovery that would astonish everyone, including himself. As he walked out of the school building that afternoon, Marcus stared up at the sky. It was a clear, blue day, the kind that made you feel like anything was possible. And maybe, just maybe, for the first time in his life, Marcus truly believed it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Marcus Johnson had always known he was different, but it wasn't always in ways that made people look at him with admiration. He wasn't the type of kid who stood out because of his talent or popularity. In fact, Marcus often found himself drifting in the background, silently observing the world around him, blending in as much as possible. The thing about Marcus was that, unlike many of his classmates, he knew things. Not just little things, but big things, ideas and concepts that felt like second nature to him. But it wasn't enough for him to stand out, because the world had already placed him into a box that he didn't have the power to break out of, yet. Growing up in a low-income neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, Marcus was no stranger to struggle. His mom, Lorraine, worked 2 jobs just to make sure that he and his younger sister, Maya, had food on the table. Lorraine was a woman who wore strength like armor. She never complained, never let on that she was struggling, even when the weight of the world was visibly pressing down on her. Marcus saw how hard his mom worked, and he admired her for it, but it also made him angry. Why did life have to be this hard? Why were people like his mom and him always having to fight for the basics? Lorraine always told him, "Your mind is your most powerful weapon, Marcus. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She was a firm believer in the power of education, even though she hadn't had the chance to finish high school herself. She knew the value of learning, and she made sure to pass that belief on to her kids. Marcus wasn't sure if he believed her at first. How could he, when everything around him seemed to tell a different story? The stories he heard from his friends, from the teachers at school, about how people like them were destined for nothing more than mediocrity, always rang loud in his ears. It was easier to believe the negativity than it was to believe that something bigger was possible. But despite the doubts that clouded his mind, something inside of Marcus began to change. It wasn't a dramatic shift. It was more like a slow, steady building of awareness. He began to notice that he could do things that others couldn't. He could solve problems with ease, understand concepts that took others days to grasp. He excelled in math, in science, even in subjects like history, where his classmates struggled with basic facts. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was that Marcus knew how to keep it all hidden. No one could know how smart he really was, not when it meant standing out, not when it meant challenging the assumptions people had already made about him. In middle school, Marcus realized that it was easier to just blend in. He didn't want to be that weird kid who finished all his work early and made everyone feel bad about their own abilities. Instead, he spent his time quietly excelling, his brilliance hidden behind a veil of indifference. He became good at playing the part, acting like he wasn't paying attention when, in reality, he had already finished the work the teacher had assigned. It was easier that way, Marcus thought. No one would expect anything from him, and no one would be disappointed when he didn't deliver. But deep down, he knew he wasn't fooling anyone. He wasn't fooling himself either. The truth was, he wanted to be seen. He wanted someone to notice that there was more to him than just the average kid from a broken home. But the world didn't seem ready for him to shine. Things didn't get any easier when Marcus entered high school. He was placed in regular classes, not the honors or AP courses that would have challenged him and recognized his true abilities. And there, the cycle continued, teachers who overlooked him, classmates who either ignored him or underestimated him, and a general feeling that he didn't belong in any of the spaces that truly valued intelligence. His best friend, Tyler, tried to encourage him to get involved, to participate more in class discussions, but Marcus always held back. Tyler knew Marcus was smart, but even he didn't understand just how much. One of the hardest things for Marcus was the fact that, no matter how much he worked, no matter how hard he pushed himself, the world seemed determined to keep him down. Teachers like Mrs. Thompson, who had all the best intentions, saw him as a kid who didn't try hard enough, who was too distracted to focus on school. Marcus could see the disappointment in their eyes when his grades didn't reflect his potential, and it crushed him. How could they expect him to do more when the odds were stacked against him from the start? How could anyone understand that there was more to him than just the grades on a paper? But it wasn't just the teachers, it was everyone. His classmates had their own biases, their own assumptions about who Marcus was based on the color of his skin and the neighborhood he came from. It wasn't uncommon for him to overhear jokes at his expense or whispers about how he was just another kid from the hood. The worst part was, Marcus began to believe it. Not consciously, but on some level, the negativity began to seep in. It became easier to stay quiet, easier to blend in, easier to hide in plain sight. But his mom wouldn't have it. Lorraine refused to let her children believe the lie that they weren't good enough, that they couldn't achieve greatness. She believed in Marcus, and that belief was the one thing that kept him going. On nights when he would come home from school defeated, she would sit him down and remind him, "Your mind is your greatest weapon, baby. And don't you ever forget it." The truth was, Marcus had always believed her deep down. But the world had a way of making him forget. And now, sitting in Mrs. Thompson's classroom, it felt like maybe, just maybe, the time had come for him to finally start proving her right. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the day, Marcus slowly packed his things. He glanced over at Mrs. Thompson, who was already buried in paperwork. There was still a part of him that wanted to slink back into the shadows, to leave without anyone noticing, to continue pretending that he didn't have anything special to offer. But today, something was different. For the first time, he wasn't just going to hide. Today, he was going to show them what he was really capable of. The next few weeks after the test felt like they lasted forever. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, but at the same time, he wasn't sure exactly what it was. His classmates treated him the same way they always had, dismissively, if they noticed him at all. Mrs. Thompson didn't seem to give him any extra attention either, despite the subtle acknowledgement she had given him after his impressive test results. Still, Marcus couldn't help but feel that something deep within him was awakening. He could feel the weight of his potential building, just waiting to break free. But how? He knew the world wasn't ready to accept him for who he truly was. After all, who would take a kid from the wrong side of town seriously? It wasn't enough to be smart, he had to be more than that. He had to be exceptional. But would anyone notice? Would anyone believe him? His doubts hung over him, a persistent weight on his shoulders, as he walked through the school halls each day. Tyler, his best friend, seemed to pick up on his growing restlessness. "You've been quieter than usual, man. What's going on?" Tyler asked one day as they walked to their next class together. He nudged Marcus in the ribs, grinning. "You're still the same kid, right? Still trying to keep a low profile, or are you finally ready to show the world what you're really made of?" Marcus rolled his eyes. "Don't make it sound so easy." Tyler raised an eyebrow. "It is easy, bro. You're smart, everyone knows that, even if they won't say it out loud. Why don't you just step up? Do what you know you can do. Who cares what anyone thinks?" Marcus gave him a dry smile. "It's not that simple. You know how they look at us. They expect us to fail. They expect me to fail." Tyler shook his head. "Don't let them put that on you. You're better than that. You don't have to be some perfect student to be great. Just show them what you can do." Marcus didn't respond. Tyler's optimism, though well-intentioned, seemed naive. They were both too aware of the expectations placed on them, the stigma that came with being a black kid in a school that rarely saw anything but your skin color before your potential. Still, Tyler's words lingered with Marcus. Maybe it wasn't as impossible as he thought. But how? How could he possibly break free from the limitations everyone had placed on him? Then, the day came when everything would change. It was a Wednesday morning, and Marcus sat in his first period class, English, trying to focus on the novel they were reading. It was a classic, To Kill a Mockingbird, but the pages felt heavier than usual. Every time he tried to read, his mind would wander, back to the test scores, to Tyler's words, to his mom's unwavering belief in him. At the front of the class, Mrs. Thompson was in the middle of a lecture about the themes of racial injustice in the book. Marcus felt a strange tension in his chest as she spoke. Something about the way she delivered the lecture rubbed him the wrong way. It was as if she was trying to explain the struggles of African Americans in the past without understanding them herself. He had heard it all before, these surface-level discussions about racism and inequality, but she didn't get it, not like he did. And that's when it happened. Mrs. Thompson turned toward the class with a smile, asking a question to prompt discussion. Who can explain how Scout's perspective on her father, Atticus Finch, changes throughout the novel? What does it tell us about the importance of understanding different viewpoints? Several hands shot up, eager to answer. But Marcus didn't raise his hand. He wasn't interested in answering questions about fictional characters when his own reality felt so much more complicated. Instead, he found himself thinking about the teacher, wondering how much she really understood. Did she know what it was like to walk through life with people already deciding who you were before they even knew you? Finally, Mrs. Thompson called on him. "Marcus, what do you think?" He was caught off guard. He hadn't been paying attention to the class discussion at all. But as he looked at her expectantly waiting for him to speak, something inside of him snapped. He stood up from his seat, pushing away his insecurities for the first time in a long while. He wasn't going to let her or anyone else underestimate him again. "Atticus Finch doesn't just teach Scout about justice," Marcus began, his voice calm but firm. "He teaches her about the courage to look at the world as it truly is, without filtering it through the lens of your own biases. In the same way, we have to understand the reality of prejudice and injustice, not just read about it in books, but see how it plays out in our own lives." The class went silent, all eyes on him. For a moment, Marcus thought he might have said too much. He could feel the weight of their stares, the discomfort, the surprise, but he couldn't take it back. He wasn't going to hide anymore. Not from them. Not from himself. Mrs. Thompson looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. She seemed to be processing what he had said, and for the first time, Marcus saw something other than judgment in her eyes. It wasn't approval, exactly, but it was curiosity. Maybe even respect. "Well said, Marcus," she said finally, with a slight nod. You're right. We often forget how important it is to truly understand the world around us, not just look at it through the lens of our own experiences. Thank you for sharing that perspective. The bell rang before anyone could say anything else, and the class quickly filed out of the room. But Marcus didn't move right away. He felt a strange, exhilarating mix of emotions. He had done it, he had stood up and said what he felt. For once, he had spoken out, and for once, someone had listened. Tyler met him outside the classroom, a big grin on his face. I saw that. Man, you nailed it. That was amazing. Marcus couldn't help but smile. Yeah, I guess I did. But as they walked down the hallway, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. There was still so much more to prove, so many more walls to break down. Little did he know, Mrs. Thompson wasn't the only one who had noticed. In the following days, the whispers would spread through the halls. The kid from the back of the room, the one everyone had underestimated, had finally spoken. And what he said was more powerful than anyone had expected. The wheels of change had been set in motion. Marcus was done hiding. Now, it was time to see how far his brilliance could take him. After his classroom revelation, Marcus thought things would settle back into their usual routine. But he couldn't have been more wrong. Suddenly, he found himself at the center of attention. His classmates, who had always seen him as just another average student, started looking at him differently. The whispers, the glances, the subtle nods, it all felt strange, like he was a curiosity they couldn't quite figure out. The truth was, Marcus had crossed a line he couldn't uncross. And in that moment, he realized there was no going back. At first, the attention wasn't overt. There were no dramatic confrontations or sudden demands for Marcus to be someone he wasn't. Instead, it was the little things, the way people asked him for help on assignments, the way teachers started to notice his potential, even when he didn't actively show it. It was as though, after years of being invisible, his brilliance was finally impossible to ignore. And with that recognition came a new set of expectations. One day, during lunch, Marcus sat at his usual spot by the window, his tray of food pushed aside as he absent-mindedly doodled in his notebook. Tyler, always his most vocal supporter, plopped down across from him, his usual grin plastered on his face. Man, you're like a walking celebrity now. Tyler exclaimed, glancing around at the other students who had started to notice Marcus more frequently. People keep asking me about you. Everyone's talking about what you said in English class. Like, seriously, Marcus, you've got people thinking now. Marcus chuckled, though the feeling of discomfort still lingered in his chest. He hadn't expected all the attention. It wasn't that he wasn't grateful, it just felt different, and a bit overwhelming. I don't know, Tyler. I wasn't trying to make a big deal out of it. I just said what I felt. I know, man, Tyler said, his voice filled with excitement. But that's what makes it so huge. You spoke the truth, and everyone's listening now. Marcus nodded absently, his mind elsewhere. He wanted to feel proud of his moment, but the weight of the situation was starting to hit him. He hadn't just spoken his mind, he had made a mark. And that meant the world was watching, waiting to see what he would do next. As if on cue, a voice interrupted his thoughts. It was Mrs. Thompson, the English teacher, who had always been supportive but had never quite seemed to recognize Marcus's potential until recently. She stood by their table, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully as she addressed him. Marcus, she began, her tone warm but serious, I've been hearing a lot about your contributions in class. I'm impressed by your insight. Have you considered participating in the upcoming academic competition? You'd be a great candidate. Marcus felt a jolt of nervous energy shoot through him. The competition was one of the school's most prestigious events, and it was designed for the best and brightest. He'd heard about it for years but had never imagined himself being part of it. It was for students who were truly exceptional, the kind of students that everyone admired and respected. It was for the ones who had it all together. And he didn't feel like he was one of them. I don't know, Mrs. Thompson, he responded hesitantly. I mean, I'm not really sure if I'd be able to. She interrupted him with a smile, her eyes gleaming with understanding. Marcus, you've already shown that you have the ability. Don't sell yourself short. This is your chance to show everyone what you're really capable of. There it was again, the pressure. The expectation. For a moment, Marcus felt trapped, like he had to prove something to everyone who had suddenly decided he was someone worth watching. He wasn't sure if he was ready for that. But then he thought of his mom, Lorraine, and the way she had always believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. He thought of the nights she had stayed up late, working overtime just to make sure he had the things he needed. She had always told him that he was destined for more, that he didn't have to settle for being invisible. He couldn't let her down now. You're right, Mrs. Thompson, Marcus said finally, with a determination he hadn't felt before. I'll do it. I'll compete. As soon as the words left his mouth, a strange sense of clarity washed over him. For the first time in a long time, Marcus felt like he was stepping into a role that was truly his own, one that wasn't shaped by others' expectations. He was going to do this for himself. And no matter what happened, he would give it everything he had. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Mrs. Thompson worked closely with Marcus, helping him prepare for the competition. It wasn't just about the material, it was about the way he presented himself, the confidence he would need to stand up in front of his peers and show them who he really was. Marcus had never been one to boast, but Mrs. Thompson's mentorship opened his eyes to the power of owning his own brilliance. At the same time, the pressure from his classmates only grew. More and more of them started asking him about his progress, offering their opinions, and some even trying to get in his way. There were those who encouraged him, sure, but there were also whispers. There were students who felt threatened by his sudden rise, by his potential to outshine them in a place where they had once been the stars. It wasn't just the students who were beginning to take notice. Marcus's relationship with his teachers was shifting as well. Some, like Mrs. Thompson, were supportive, pushing him to reach higher and reminding him of his potential. Others, however, were less enthusiastic. They didn't believe that a kid like Marcus could be the one to take the school's top prize. His teachers, especially the ones who had always written him off, were more than a little skeptical. They had their doubts, and Marcus could sense it in the way they glanced at him in class. But despite all of this, Marcus was driven. Every day, he spent hours after school preparing for the competition. He studied relentlessly, absorbed every bit of material, and pushed himself harder than he ever had before. It was no longer just about proving his worth to others. It was about proving it to himself. The competition day arrived sooner than he expected. Marcus walked into the auditorium, his heart pounding in his chest. It was a large space, filled with students who all seemed to be a step ahead of him. They were confident, polished, and ready to show the world what they were capable of. He couldn't help but feel like an outsider. Yet, deep inside, he knew something that the others didn't, he had something they couldn't see yet. As he walked to his seat, he turned to Tyler, who gave him a thumbs up. "You've got this, bro," Tyler said, his voice full of encouragement. "Go show them what you're made of." Marcus took a deep breath, trying to calm the nerves that were threatening to take over. This was it. His moment. He wasn't going to let it slip away. As the competition began, he could feel the weight of everyone's expectations on his shoulders. But for the first time in his life, it didn't feel like pressure. It felt like freedom. The lights in the auditorium seemed brighter than usual, almost blinding as Marcus stepped up to the front of the stage. His heart was racing, but his mind was strangely calm. This was it, the moment he had been preparing for. But as he glanced around at the sea of faces, he felt a wave of doubt wash over him. The other students looked so confident, so ready, and here he was, just a kid from the wrong side of town. What if he wasn't enough? What if, after all this effort, it still wasn't enough? But then he remembered Tyler's words, "You've got this, bro." He wasn't just doing this for Tyler, though. He was doing this for himself, for the kid who had been invisible for so long, for the kid who had always been underestimated. He wasn't going to let this chance slip by. The moderator stepped forward and announced the start of the first round. Marcus could feel the tension in the room, his pulse quickening, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the mic on the podium. The first question was read aloud, and as soon as he heard it, his mind clicked into place. The answer came easily, a smooth stream of facts and insights, delivered with a confidence that even surprised him. He finished speaking, and the room was silent for a moment. The judges, a panel of teachers and outside experts, scribbled down notes. Finally, one of them, Mrs. Pierce, the chemistry teacher, looked up at him. "Well done, Marcus. You've obviously put in the work. This is what we expected." Marcus barely registered her praise. His focus was on the second round. His stomach twisted with anxiety, but he pushed it aside. He was going to make it through this. He wasn't going to be afraid anymore. The competition continued, each round presenting more challenges, tougher questions, and unexpected hurdles. Every answer, every solution he provided, felt like a small victory. But with each victory came more pressure. The other students were no longer just competitors, they were adversaries. They had been the ones who'd always been top of the class, the ones who others expected to win. And now, Marcus had become one of them. But as the rounds wore on, Marcus felt an unfamiliar heaviness settle on his chest. The weight of expectation was becoming overwhelming. He could feel the eyes on him, the whispers in the hallways. The students who once overlooked him were now watching him like hawks, waiting for him to fail. Then, it happened. The final round. The question was one that had stumped even the most confident students. It was about a complex mathematical problem, something that could make or break his chances of winning. Marcus stood there for what felt like an eternity, the room silent, all eyes on him. He could feel the sweat on his brow, the pulse in his neck. His hands were cold, the trembling no longer something he could ignore. He looked down at the question on the screen in front of him, and for a moment, everything seemed to blur. The numbers, the calculations, they all mixed together in a haze. What if he couldn't solve it? What if he couldn't finish? But then, something inside of him clicked. A memory came rushing back, his mom sitting with him late at night, explaining that there were no impossible problems, just problems waiting for a solution. He could do this. He had to do this. The world around him seemed to fall away as his mind worked. The question that had seemed so daunting just moments ago became clear. He scribbled down the answer on his scratch paper, then stood up, his voice steady, his eyes focused. "The solution to this problem is 472.65, he said, and there was a surprising confidence in his voice. It wasn't just the right answer, it was the right answer with a level of clarity that even surprised him. The judges exchanged glances, and for a moment, Marcus thought he might have made a mistake. But then, Mrs. Thompson, one of the judges, smiled, a smile so wide and proud that it felt like it could light up the entire room. "That's correct," she said, her voice clear and filled with warmth. "Well done, Marcus. You've just earned yourself the first place spot." A wave of emotion crashed over Marcus. He had done it. He had won. But more than that, he had proven to himself, and to everyone else, that he wasn't just another kid from the wrong side of town. He was smart, capable, and powerful beyond measure. As the crowd erupted into applause, Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. His heart was pounding in his chest, his hands shaking, but he didn't care. He had done it. He had defied every expectation placed on him and come out on top. But as the excitement settled, another feeling began to take its place, something deeper. The weight of everything he had been through, the sacrifices his mom had made, the endless nights of study and self-doubt, it all came rushing back. It wasn't just about winning a competition. It was about everything he had fought for, everything he had believed in when no one else did. Tyler rushed over to him, his face beaming with pride. "Dude, I knew you had it in you. You killed it." Marcus grinned, but his voice was thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you, Tyler. You always believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Tyler clapped him on the back. "Nah, man, you did all the work. You're the one who earned it. This is just the beginning for you, you know that, right?" As the crowd around them continued to cheer, Marcus's eyes found Mrs. Thompson in the audience, clapping just as hard as the rest. She was proud of him, and in that moment, he realized something important. He had earned her respect, not because he had proven everyone wrong, but because he had stayed true to himself. Later that evening, as Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his mom, his first-place trophy beside him, Lorraine smiled at him, a mixture of pride and love in her eyes. "You did it, baby," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "I always knew you could." Marcus looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. You've always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." She pulled him into a hug. "You don't ever have to doubt yourself again, Marcus. You've always been enough." As he sat there in his mother's embrace, Marcus finally understood. It wasn't about the competition, the applause, or the recognition. It was about believing in himself and never backing down from his potential. He had always been enough. The days following Marcus's victory were a blur. He had won the academic competition, his name had been etched into the school's history, and the entire student body was talking about him. For the first time in his life, Marcus was a topic of conversation, not for what he lacked, but for what he had achieved. It was both exhilarating and overwhelming. His classmates began to treat him differently, some with newfound respect, others with envy. At first, Marcus reveled in the attention. He was finally being seen for who he truly was, not just the quiet, average kid he had once been. Teachers, like Mrs. Thompson, were full of praise and encouragement, telling him he had a bright future ahead of him. He began to feel like a different person, like the world had suddenly opened up to him in ways he hadn't expected. But as time went on, Marcus started to realize something unsettling. The expectations placed on him were beginning to feel like a heavy burden. The weight of constantly having to live up to others' perceptions of him started to wear him down. It was one thing to prove people wrong, but now that they believed in him, it felt like he had no room to fail. Tyler noticed the shift in Marcus's mood one afternoon when they were hanging out at the park after school. Marcus had been unusually quiet, staring off into the distance while absently tossing a ball back and forth with his best friend. "Hey, what's up with you, man?" Tyler asked, his voice concerned. "You've been kinda off lately." Marcus sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know, man. It's just. I thought winning the competition would feel different. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad I did it. But now it feels like there's this constant pressure to be perfect. Like everyone's expecting me to keep living up to this genius image they have of me." Tyler frowned and stopped tossing the ball. "Dude, you don't have to be perfect. You're Marcus, right? The guy who's smart and cool and real. Don't let everyone's expectations mess with your head. You got here because you were being yourself." Marcus looked down at the ball in his hands, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "Yeah, but being myself doesn't seem like enough anymore. I feel like I'm supposed to have it all figured out. Everyone expects me to keep winning, keep impressing people. What if I can't do that?" Tyler placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've got something way more important than all that pressure. You've got heart, Marcus. You've got the ability to keep going, no matter what. Don't let the world make you think you have to be something you're not." Marcus let out a long breath, feeling the weight in his chest ease a little. Tyler was right, as always. He had been so focused on the expectations of others that he had forgotten what had gotten him here in the first place: his passion, his love for learning, and his belief in himself. Later that night, as Marcus sat at the kitchen table, his mom sat across from him, her eyes gentle yet perceptive. Lorraine had always known when something was off with her son, and tonight was no different. "You okay, baby?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with concern. Marcus hesitated, unsure of how to explain the way he was feeling. "I don't know, Mom. I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened, winning the competition, all the attention, the way everyone looks at me now. It's like I don't even recognize myself sometimes." Lorraine studied him for a moment, her expression understanding. "It's a lot to process, huh? You've worked so hard, and now people are seeing you in a way they never have before. That's a big change, and change can be scary." Marcus nodded. "Yeah, but it's not just the change. It's the pressure. People keep asking me what's next, what I'm going to do with all this potential, like I have to be something more than I am right now. What if I don't have all the answers? What if I can't keep up with their expectations?" Lorraine reached out, taking his hand in hers. "Marcus, you've always been more than enough. You don't have to have everything figured out right now. Life isn't about meeting other people's expectations. It's about finding your own path, your own purpose. You don't need to be perfect, you just need to be true to yourself." Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes, his mother's words cutting through the self-doubt that had been clouding his mind. She had always believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. He realized that he had been so focused on meeting others' expectations that he had lost sight of the person he had always been. "You're right, Mom," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been so focused on trying to be perfect for everyone else that I forgot about the most important thing, being myself." Lorraine smiled, pulling him into a tight hug. "That's all anyone can ever ask for, Marcus. Just be you. That's all you need to be." The next morning, Marcus woke up with a new sense of clarity. He was still the same Marcus, the same kid who had worked hard, who had faced challenges, and who had learned to believe in himself. The competition was over, but his journey was far from finished. He wasn't going to let the pressure of others' expectations control him. He had his own path to follow, and it was time for him to start walking it. As he walked to school that day, Marcus felt lighter, freer than he had in weeks. The weight of perfectionism had lifted, and he was ready to embrace whatever came next, knowing that the only thing he needed to do was be true to who he was. And when he stepped into his English class, Mrs. Thompson gave him a nod of approval, as if she could see the shift in him. "Marcus," she said, her voice filled with pride, "I've been hearing great things about you. Keep it up. I'm excited to see where you go from here." Marcus smiled, nodding back. "Thanks, Mrs. Thompson. I'll keep going." As the bell rang, signaling the start of class, Marcus felt a renewed sense of confidence. He didn't have all the answers, but that was okay. What mattered was that he was ready to continue the journey, one step at a time. And that, he realized, was enough. The next few weeks after the competition felt like a whirlwind. Marcus had gotten used to the newfound attention, though it still made him feel uncomfortable at times. He wasn't the kind of person who craved the spotlight, but now, it seemed impossible to escape. Everywhere he went, people were congratulating him or asking about his future plans. It was flattering, yes, but it was also overwhelming. At school, he had become somewhat of a local celebrity. His teachers treated him with a new respect, offering extra help and pushing him to aim higher. Mrs. Thompson had even mentioned the possibility of him applying for a scholarship to a prestigious summer program for gifted students. It was all so much, so fast. For the first time, Marcus found himself doubting his readiness to take on everything they expected of him. But then he would think of his mom, of the years she had worked so hard for him to have a chance at something bigger. He couldn't disappoint her. He had to keep pushing forward. One afternoon, after school, Marcus sat at his usual spot in the library, quietly flipping through a book about quantum physics. He liked the way the world of numbers and theories made sense to him in a way that nothing else did. The patterns, the logic, it felt like a puzzle waiting to be solved. He could lose himself in it for hours. "Hey, genius," Tyler said, slipping into the seat across from Marcus. "Mind if I join?" Marcus smiled and pushed the book aside. "Of course not. What's up?" Tyler leaned in, looking conspiratorially around the library. "I need your help with something. It's math homework, got a big test coming up and, well, you know how that goes. I was hoping you could explain something to me. You're the expert now, right?" Marcus chuckled. "Yeah, I guess I am the expert now." His tone was teasing, but inside, he was still getting used to the title. He had never imagined that his love for learning could lead to being the one everyone turned to for help. Tyler wasn't the only one who had started seeing Marcus in a new light. As Marcus helped Tyler work through the math problems, a sense of purpose settled in him. For the first time in weeks, he realized that his life wasn't just about impressing others or living up to their expectations. It was about helping others, about sharing what he had learned, and finding joy in doing it. After they finished the homework, Marcus felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned around to see Sarah, one of the girls from his class, standing there with a shy smile. "Hey, Marcus," she said, her voice tentative. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. He hadn't expected Sarah to approach him. She was quiet, always hanging out with her group of friends, and they didn't exactly run in the same circles. "Sure, what's up?" Sarah looked around, clearly nervous. "I just wanted to say that, you're really inspiring. I've been struggling with my own grades for a while, and after the competition, I started thinking maybe I should try harder. You know, if you can do it, maybe I can too." Marcus blinked, taken aback by her words. He had no idea that his actions had had such an impact on someone like Sarah. "I didn't realize you felt that way," he said quietly. "But if I can do it, anyone can. You just have to believe in yourself and not let the setbacks hold you back." Sarah nodded, her eyes brightening. "Thanks, Marcus. Seriously. You're way cooler than I thought." Marcus felt his cheeks flush, and he smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. It wasn't about being cool, but knowing that he had helped someone made him realize something, maybe all the attention, all the pressure, was worth it. If he could help even one person, then it was all worth it. The following day, Marcus sat in his favorite spot in the school courtyard, enjoying the cool breeze and the quiet. He was beginning to understand that life wasn't about being perfect or pleasing others, it was about making connections and growing. And it wasn't just about winning or impressing people. It was about the moments of personal growth, of realizing that you were on the right path, no matter how uncertain it might feel. That afternoon, Mrs. Thompson called him into her office. When he walked in, he saw her sitting behind her desk with a serious look on her face, though her eyes sparkled with pride. "Marcus, I've been talking with the scholarship committee," she said. "They're very impressed with you. They think you have great potential, and they want you to apply for the summer program I mentioned. It's an incredible opportunity, and I really believe you should consider it." Marcus felt a rush of excitement. This was it. This was the kind of chance that didn't come around often. But as quickly as the excitement came, a feeling of unease settled in. He hadn't expected things to move this fast. Was he ready? Was he good enough for something like this? "I don't know, Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice uncertain. "It's just. I feel like I'm still figuring things out. I don't know if I'm really cut out for something like that." Mrs. Thompson smiled warmly, her eyes filled with understanding. "Marcus, you are more than ready. Sometimes, the only thing holding us back is our own fear. You've already proven that you can handle pressure, that you can overcome challenges. You have a gift, and it's time to let it shine. He felt her words settle deep within him. He had been doubting himself again, afraid of failing, afraid of not being enough. But Mrs. Thompson was right. He was ready. He didn't have to have all the answers right now. What mattered was that he believed in himself, and he was willing to take the next step. "I'll do it," Marcus said, finally making up his mind. "I'll apply for the scholarship. I think it's time to see what I can really do." That evening, as Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his mom, he told her about the scholarship opportunity. Lorraine's face lit up with pride, and she pulled him into a tight hug. "I knew you could do it, Marcus. You're going places, big places. And I'm so proud of you." Marcus grinned, feeling a sense of warmth fill him. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time, he was excited to find out. The morning of the first day at the summer program, Marcus woke up with a sense of nervous excitement. The scholarship had been granted, and now he was heading to a prestigious university campus for a month-long immersive academic experience. It felt surreal. This was a world far beyond his own, an elite setting full of brilliant students, all seemingly miles ahead in their academic pursuits. Marcus took a deep breath, reminding himself of the path he had walked to get here, from the quiet kid who had struggled in school to the one now about to take on a life-changing opportunity. He couldn't let fear or self-doubt take over. This was his chance to prove something, not to anyone else, but to himself. The campus was breathtaking. Tall, ivy-covered buildings that seemed to have stood the test of time. Green lawns stretched as far as the eye could see, and the scent of fresh-cut grass lingered in the air. Marcus had never seen anything like it. Everything was perfect, too perfect, almost, as if this was a place only reserved for those who truly belonged. He checked in and received his program materials before being guided to a large lecture hall where all the students would meet for orientation. The hall was filled with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. Some students were already chatting animatedly, while others, like Marcus, looked around, unsure of how to break the ice. He was assigned to a small group led by Professor Davis, a tall, sharply dressed man with glasses and a serious demeanor. The professor wasted no time getting down to business, introducing the week's schedule, which would be packed with lectures, group projects, and individual research assignments. As soon as Marcus heard the details, he felt his pulse quicken. This wasn't going to be a vacation, it was going to be challenging. After the initial briefing, Marcus found himself sitting in a group with 3 other students: Olivia, a quiet, introverted girl with short black hair and a reputation for being a math prodigy; Caleb, a charismatic, athletic type who seemed to effortlessly command attention; and Emma, a high-strung overachiever who was so focused on succeeding that it felt like she was constantly in motion. "Hey, Marcus, right?" Olivia asked shyly, breaking the silence. "I read about you in the school newsletter. That competition you won was impressive." Marcus, taken aback, nodded. "Yeah, thanks. I didn't expect it to get so much attention." Emma piped up immediately, eager to engage. "You must be excited to be here. We're all in the same boat, but I have a feeling you're going to ace everything. This is the perfect environment for someone like you, with your talent." Marcus smiled awkwardly. "I guess we'll see. I'm just here to learn, like everyone else." Caleb leaned back in his chair, giving Marcus a calculating look. "You know, with your background, you could probably breeze through this program. I'm sure you're used to pushing yourself, huh?" Marcus wasn't sure how to respond. He didn't want to come off as someone who had it all figured out. Truth was, he was nervous. This environment was completely new, and he felt out of his depth. But he didn't want to show that. Not here. Not now. Professor Davis began the first lecture, a deep dive into artificial intelligence, a subject that was both fascinating and overwhelming. The students took notes diligently as the professor outlined various concepts, from machine learning algorithms to neural networks. Marcus could feel the energy of the room shift from casual chatter to intense focus as the lecture went on. For the first time in a while, Marcus felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. This was his element, this was the kind of challenge that had drawn him to the program in the first place. The next few days passed by in a blur of lectures, discussions, and group activities. Marcus found himself working closely with Olivia and Emma, while Caleb often drifted off into conversations with other students. Marcus and Olivia clicked, though. They shared a quiet bond over their mutual love for math and science, and they worked well together in tackling assignments. Emma, on the other hand, was always one step ahead, pushing the group to complete everything perfectly and on time, sometimes making Marcus feel like he was barely keeping up. The pressure was mounting, but Marcus kept pushing through. He kept reminding himself why he was here, to prove to himself that he was capable of more. But as the days went on, he started to feel the weight of the competition. It was hard to avoid comparing himself to the others, Olivia, who seemed to grasp every concept so easily, Emma, who had an answer for everything, and Caleb, who always seemed to be the center of attention. One afternoon, after a particularly tough group project, Marcus walked outside to clear his head. The air was thick with humidity, and the sky was an intense shade of blue. He walked across the campus, his mind racing with thoughts of self-doubt. Was he truly cut out for this? Was he even close to being as talented as the others here? He had worked so hard to get here, but now he wondered if he had done it for the wrong reasons. "Hey," Olivia's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "You okay?" Marcus turned to find Olivia standing nearby, her expression concerned. She must have noticed his distracted state. "I'm fine," Marcus replied quickly, but his voice lacked conviction. "Just thinking." Olivia gave him a knowing look. "You know, I've been watching you. You're smart, Marcus. But I think you're holding yourself back. You've got all this potential, but you're too afraid to use it." Marcus shook his head. "I'm just trying to keep up with everyone else. They're all so much farther ahead than me." Olivia smiled softly, her eyes full of understanding. "You don't have to keep up with anyone. The only person you should be competing against is yourself. You're here because you belong here. You just have to trust that." Her words hit Marcus like a wake-up call. He had spent so much time trying to measure up to others that he had forgotten why he was truly here, to grow, to learn, and to push his own limits. Olivia was right. It wasn't about proving himself to anyone else, it was about proving something to himself. Later that evening, Marcus found a quiet spot to sit alone and reflect. His mind was clearer than it had been in days. He realized that the only way forward was to stop looking over his shoulder and comparing himself to everyone else. He had his own path to follow, and it was time to start walking it with confidence. The rest of the program would be tough, but Marcus was ready. Ready to embrace the challenges ahead, to grow, and to trust in his abilities. This was just the beginning, and he was determined to make the most of it. By the end of the second week, Marcus had started to feel more at home in the summer program. He'd settled into a rhythm, managing his time between lectures, group activities, and the endless stream of assignments. The pressure had eased slightly, and he was starting to realize that, while the program was demanding, it was also incredibly rewarding. Still, the competitive atmosphere hung thick in the air. Marcus couldn't help but feel the weight of expectations as he saw other students, especially Emma and Olivia, excel effortlessly. Emma was still pushing the group to complete everything perfectly, often taking control of their projects and dominating the conversations. Olivia was quiet but brilliant, often working independently while managing to keep up with every subject and assignment. But it wasn't until the announcement of the mid-program exam that Marcus felt a familiar knot in his stomach. Professor Davis called for the entire group to meet in the lecture hall. The room was filled with an anticipatory buzz, as everyone whispered about the exam that had been rumored to be one of the most challenging tests the program had ever seen. "Listen up," Professor Davis said, his voice cutting through the chatter. "The mid-program exam is tomorrow. It will be unlike anything you've encountered before. It will test your knowledge, your creativity, and your ability to work under pressure. There's no room for mistakes. This will determine whether you'll be eligible for a spot in the final project showcase. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. He knew the stakes were high, but hearing Professor Davis's words made everything feel so much more real. He had thought he'd been doing well, but now it was clear, this test was about more than just the material, it was about who could handle the pressure, who could rise to the challenge when everything was on the line. You'll have 2 hours, Professor Davis continued. You may work individually or collaborate, but remember, this is a test of your own abilities. I expect each of you to demonstrate your full potential. Marcus glanced around the room. Everyone seemed calm, too calm. Caleb was laughing with a few students at the back of the room, Emma was already scribbling down notes furiously, and Olivia was sitting silently, eyes fixed on her notebook. It didn't make sense. How could they all be so relaxed? Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were better prepared than he was. But then again, they weren't the ones who had spent years trying to get by. Marcus had never been the type to coast on raw talent. Everything he'd learned had come from hours of hard work, hours of pushing himself beyond his comfort zone. That night, Marcus stayed up late, reviewing every lecture, every concept, every assignment. He took notes, solved problems, and practiced every technique he had learned so far. But the harder he studied, the more he felt the pressure building. He wasn't just worried about the exam, he was worried about the stakes. The showcase, being selected to present the final project, was a dream he had never allowed himself to have, and now it was suddenly within his grasp. He remembered what Olivia had said to him earlier in the week, "You're here because you belong here." But in the back of his mind, the old doubts crept in. Was he really good enough? Did he belong here? The night dragged on, and when he finally crawled into bed, the pressure felt unbearable. He tried to sleep, but his mind wouldn't shut off. His thoughts raced as he imagined the worst-case scenarios. What if he failed? What if he froze under the pressure? The next morning, Marcus barely managed to eat breakfast before heading back to the lecture hall. His nerves were on edge, but there was no turning back now. The clock was ticking, and today's test was the moment that could change everything. The exam was held in the same lecture hall, the atmosphere now tense and filled with hushed conversations. Marcus sat at a desk near the front, his palms sweating and his heart racing. He tried to steady his breath, telling himself to stay focused. He had prepared. He could do this. Professor Davis handed out the test papers, and as Marcus glanced at the questions, a jolt of realization hit him. The test wasn't just about rote memorization. It was about applying the concepts they'd learned in new and unpredictable ways. There were problems on quantum physics, machine learning, and even ethical dilemmas involving AI, testing not only their knowledge but their ability to think critically. Marcus felt a rush of panic. The first few questions were tricky, requiring complex calculations and in-depth knowledge. His mind raced as he scrambled to get the formulas right. But as he went through each question, he realized something: it wasn't about getting everything perfect. It was about solving the problems in the most efficient and creative way possible. He thought back to the first day when Olivia had told him to stop comparing himself to others. This was his chance to prove that, yes, he could compete, not by being like everyone else, but by being himself. As the clock ticked down, Marcus found his rhythm. He pushed past the self-doubt and focused on the test in front of him. He remembered every lesson, every small breakthrough he had experienced over the past few weeks. The equations that once seemed impossible now seemed logical, and the theories that had once felt abstract began to make sense in ways he hadn't expected. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There was one problem, a particularly difficult algorithm, that completely stumped him. For a moment, panic crept in, but then he paused. He took a deep breath and remembered something his mom had always told him: if you don't know the answer right away, step back. Think it through. Marcus closed his eyes for a brief second, letting his mind reset. And then, it came to him. He remembered a similar problem from one of his old textbooks, a different method of solving the same type of algorithm. His hands shook slightly as he scribbled down the solution, relieved but still aware that time was running out. With only a few minutes left, he managed to finish the last question just as the bell rang. He handed in his paper, his heart pounding in his chest. For the first time since he had arrived, he wasn't sure what to expect. That afternoon, the results were posted. Marcus stood in front of the bulletin board, his stomach twisting in knots. His eyes scanned the list of names, looking for his own. When he saw it, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He had passed. Not only that, he had scored in the top 5. A sense of disbelief washed over him. He had done it. The doubts that had clouded his mind over the past few weeks began to dissipate. For the first time, Marcus truly believed that maybe, just maybe, he did belong here. But this was just the beginning. The final project showcase was ahead, and Marcus knew it would be even more challenging. But if there was one thing he had learned from this test, it was that he was capable of far more than he had ever given himself credit for. The night after the exam, Marcus felt both exhilarated and exhausted. Scoring in the top 5 was a huge accomplishment, but the relief was fleeting. He knew the hardest part was still ahead, the final project. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the opportunity to showcase everything he had learned, and possibly secure a future in the world of academia and research. The next morning, Professor Davis called for a meeting. The energy in the lecture hall was different now. The students who had previously been floating by on their charm or social status were all focused, serious. It felt like the calm before a storm. As I mentioned earlier, Professor Davis began, standing at the front of the room, the final project will be the defining moment of this program. You will be divided into teams, and together, you will tackle a complex, real-world problem involving AI, ethics, and the future of technology. Marcus couldn't help but feel a twinge of excitement. This was exactly the kind of challenge he had hoped for when he applied to the program. But then came the next sentence that made his stomach drop. I have decided to assign the teams randomly. A murmur of shock swept through the room. Some students exchanged wary looks, others nervously adjusted in their seats. Marcus felt his palms begin to sweat. Randomly? That meant he could end up with anyone, and there was no telling how well they'd work together. Professor Davis handed out slips of paper with the names of team members written on them. Marcus took his slip, trying to ignore the rising anxiety in his chest. He unfolded the paper slowly, scanning the names. His team would consist of himself, Olivia, Caleb, and Emma. Marcus froze for a moment. Emma. Of all people, she had been the most intense and perfectionistic of the group. She was smart, unquestionably so, but she was also hard to work with, often taking charge of everything. Marcus had seen how she dominated the group discussions, pushing everyone to the limit, and he wasn't sure how he felt about working with her. But before he could dwell on his reservations, he noticed that Olivia, sitting beside him, seemed to share his look of concern. Emma and Caleb, meanwhile, had already begun talking in low voices, no doubt discussing their strategy for the project. The first meeting of the new group was scheduled for the following afternoon. As soon as Marcus arrived at the designated study room, he was greeted by Caleb, who had already taken a seat at the head of the table, exuding his usual confidence. "All right, guys, let's get this project rolling," Caleb said with a grin, clapping his hands together. "I'm thinking we break this down into manageable parts. I'll lead the research section, Emma can take the coding, and Olivia, you're really good at organizing, right? You can handle the documentation and reports. Marcus, what's your strong suit?" Marcus blinked. Was this really happening? Caleb was taking charge without even consulting anyone else. Emma and Olivia didn't seem surprised, but Marcus felt the blood rush to his face. I can help with the algorithms," Marcus offered, trying to find his footing in the new dynamic. It was hard to keep his tone even when it felt like the entire project was being planned without his input. Caleb gave him an approving nod. Great. That works. So it's settled. We all know what we're doing. Emma, who had been silently observing, leaned forward. Actually, Caleb, I think we should rethink that strategy, she said coolly, her voice cutting through the tension. Marcus is the one who scored in the top 5 on the exam. I believe he should take the lead on the algorithms, while I'll focus on the coding. I think this is where we'll get the most value from Marcus's expertise. Marcus felt his heart race at the unexpected support from Emma. He looked over at Olivia, who was nodding in agreement, and for the first time since the team was announced, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Emma wasn't as unbearable as he'd thought. She seemed to respect his abilities, and it was clear she wasn't willing to let Caleb push things forward without consulting everyone. Caleb frowned but didn't argue. Fine, but we need to stay organized and efficient. This project is worth a lot. I want it to be perfect. Marcus took a deep breath. It wasn't ideal, but maybe, just maybe, this could work. Olivia didn't speak up much, but she was always sharp when it came to keeping things on track. If they could just get through Caleb's overconfidence and Emma's need for control, maybe they'd make something great. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The team met regularly to plan, research, and code. Emma and Marcus often found themselves working side by side, debating algorithms, discussing the best methods, and troubleshooting problems. It was clear that she was brilliant, her coding skills were exceptional, and her ability to anticipate potential issues was impressive. Still, there was a level of tension between them. Emma's intensity often clashed with Marcus's more laid-back approach, and Caleb's disregard for detail only made things worse. At first, Marcus was overwhelmed. He was used to working alone, setting his own pace, and not having to compromise on his methods. But as time went on, he realized something: the strength of their team wasn't just in their individual talents, but in how they could complement each other. He had been hesitant about working with Emma, but her expertise in coding and her strategic mind were invaluable. Even Caleb, with his brash leadership style, had good ideas when it came to innovation. Olivia, quiet as she was, played an important role in keeping them all organized, making sure every task was on track and everyone was on the same page. The project was coming together in ways Marcus hadn't anticipated. They were creating an AI system that could predict outcomes in real-world scenarios, a system that could be used in everything from healthcare to climate change predictions. The implications of their project were vast, and the pressure was on. But despite the stress, Marcus found himself growing. He learned to trust in his teammates, especially Emma, who had proven to be more collaborative than he had expected. With every breakthrough they made, he could feel his confidence building, and for the first time, he truly felt like he belonged at this program. But as the final presentation loomed ever closer, Marcus realized that this project was more than just about winning. It was about learning to work with others, to compromise, and to bring out the best in each other, even if it meant pushing himself beyond his comfort zone. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days leading up to the final presentation were a blur of long nights, tight deadlines, and sleepless hours spent hunched over computers. Marcus, Emma, Caleb, and Olivia were working tirelessly to perfect their AI project, a system that could predict outcomes in real-world scenarios, from natural disasters to social trends. The complexity of the project was both thrilling and overwhelming, and every team member had their own vision of what the final result should look like. Marcus felt an unease growing in him as the days ticked down. While the team had made significant progress, he noticed cracks starting to form. The harmony they had initially found in the first few days of collaboration was beginning to crumble under the weight of the pressure. It started subtly, with Caleb taking charge a little more than usual. His decisions, although bold, began to feel rushed, and he would push ideas through without consulting the team first. Marcus, who had been more reserved, found himself growing increasingly frustrated. Emma, usually the voice of reason, had also become more intense. She was adamant about every line of code being perfect, which was, of course, important, but her insistence on perfection was stifling creativity. It was as though she saw any imperfection as a threat to their success. Olivia, as quiet as ever, was the one who felt the most overlooked. She had been doing the behind-the-scenes work, organizing meetings, managing deadlines, and putting together the reports. But every time she made a suggestion, it was either ignored or dismissed as insignificant. One afternoon, after a particularly tense meeting where Caleb had shot down Olivia's suggestion to include a more user-friendly interface, Marcus decided he could no longer stay silent. "Caleb," Marcus said, his voice steady but firm, "I think we need to talk about the direction we're going in. I'm feeling like we're not really listening to each other anymore. And it's not just you, it's all of us." Caleb turned, clearly taken aback by Marcus's directness. He crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair. "What are you talking about? We're doing fine. We've got the algorithms, the coding, we just need to finish it." "That's not what I'm saying," Marcus replied. "I mean, we're rushing through this. We're all pushing our own ideas without thinking about what the rest of the team wants or needs. Emma's going a mile a minute with her coding, but we're not really seeing the bigger picture. Olivia suggested a more accessible design for the user interface, and you just dismissed it like it didn't matter." Emma, who had been quiet up until that point, spoke up, her tone sharp. "Marcus, I've been coding non-stop, trying to perfect every part of this project. You can't expect me to just throw together something halfway decent. We need precision." "I get that," Marcus said, meeting her gaze. "But there's a difference between perfection and paralysis. If we don't make this project usable, it's going to be a waste of all our work. We need to come together on this, not just fight for our own vision." There was a long pause. Emma and Caleb exchanged a glance, and Olivia, who had been quietly listening, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "We're not fighting for our own vision," Caleb said defensively. "We're fighting to make this the best. It's just that you're all overthinking everything. We can't afford to slow down now." But Olivia, who had been quiet until now, stood up. Her voice was calm but full of quiet strength. "Actually, I agree with Marcus. We've been pushing and pushing, but I think we're missing something. We're so focused on the technical side that we're forgetting about the people who will use this technology. If we're not careful, we'll create something brilliant but completely impractical. I'm just trying to make sure we're thinking about all aspects of the project, not just the math." The room fell silent. Olivia's words hung in the air like a challenge. Caleb shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his confidence momentarily faltering. Emma looked down at her laptop, a frown on her face. For a few moments, no one spoke. The tension in the room was palpable, and Marcus could feel the weight of the team's unspoken issues pressing down on them. This wasn't just about the project anymore. It was about how they communicated, or, in this case, how they hadn't been communicating. Finally, Emma sighed. "Look, I didn't mean to ignore Olivia's suggestion. I'm under a lot of pressure, okay? I'm trying to make sure this thing works. We're running out of time, and it's hard to balance everything." Marcus softened. "I know. We all are. But we're in this together. We can't keep pushing each other away just because we're stressed out. We need to work through this, together." There was another pause, but this time it felt different. The tension was still there, but it was no longer unspoken. It was as if the team was finally acknowledging that they had been stepping on each other's toes without realizing it. Caleb's arrogance, Emma's perfectionism, Olivia's quiet frustration, it all came to a head in that moment. "I'm sorry," Caleb muttered after a while. "I shouldn't have dismissed Olivia's idea. You're right. We need to rethink how we're doing things. Let's go over everything again, and this time, let's actually listen to each other. Emma nodded, her gaze shifting between Caleb and Marcus. I think I'm pushing too hard. I'll ease up and try to be more open to feedback. Olivia smiled, a small but genuine expression of relief. Thanks, guys. I just want this to be something we can all be proud of. Marcus let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The air felt lighter now. The cracks in their team were still there, but they had been acknowledged, and for the first time in days, Marcus felt like they could actually pull this off. The next few days were a turning point. With tensions diffused, the team found a new rhythm. They worked together more cohesively, bouncing ideas off each other without fear of judgment. Emma's coding became more collaborative, and Olivia's organizational skills helped to keep everything on track. Caleb's leadership, while still occasionally too forceful, had become more balanced, and Marcus found himself becoming more confident in his role as the algorithm expert. As the final presentation approached, Marcus realized that the team's strength lay not in their individual talents, but in their ability to challenge each other, to push past their differences and create something meaningful. They had come a long way since the first days of the program, and now, they were ready for the next step. But despite the newfound unity, Marcus knew the real challenge was still ahead. The presentation would be a test of everything they had learned, and if they failed, all their hard work would have been for nothing. The clock was ticking. The pressure had never been higher. The final project was due in just 2 days, and Marcus could feel the weight of it pressing down on him more with every passing hour. They had worked tirelessly to perfect their AI system, a tool capable of predicting complex real-world scenarios, but the hardest part was yet to come, the presentation. The team met late into the night in their designated study room. Empty coffee cups littered the table, and the hum of computers filled the otherwise silent space. Caleb, who had taken on the role of the final project's main presenter, paced back and forth, practicing his lines in front of the whiteboard. We need to hit every key point, Caleb muttered to himself. The algorithms, the coding, the real-world applications, it has to be perfect. No room for error. Emma, sitting hunched over her laptop, didn't look up. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, tweaking the final lines of code. We'll be fine as long as the system runs smoothly during the demo. I just want to make sure it doesn't crash in front of everyone. Olivia, who had spent the past few hours reviewing the slides for the presentation, spoke up, her voice steady but tired. We've covered all the technical aspects. But we need to remember that the presentation isn't just about numbers and code. It's about how we present our findings, how we connect with the audience. Marcus nodded, appreciating Olivia's level-headedness. He had been so consumed with the algorithms and their functionality that he had almost forgotten about the bigger picture, the people who would be watching. This wasn't just about showcasing their work, it was about telling a story. I'll handle the algorithm demo, Marcus said, standing up from his seat. I know it inside and out, and I can explain it in a way that's easy to follow. I'll keep it simple but make sure they see how powerful the system is. Emma looked up from her screen, giving Marcus a rare smile. Sounds good. I trust you to explain it clearly. If you need anything from me during the demo, just let me know. Marcus's heart skipped a beat at Emma's unexpected support. They had come a long way since that first awkward team meeting, and now it felt like they were truly working together, each of them playing to their strengths. The next morning, as they prepared for the final rehearsal, Marcus found himself pacing the hallway outside the lecture hall, his nerves eating away at him. His palms were sweaty, his stomach was in knots. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. He had worked so hard to get here, but now that it was time to deliver, doubt crept in. What if the system malfunctioned? What if he couldn't explain the algorithms clearly enough? What if, after all this work, they didn't succeed? He shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. Focus, he muttered under his breath. Inside the lecture hall, Caleb was already setting up their presentation materials. Emma was at the computer, running the final checks on their demo. Olivia was quietly reviewing her notes for the slides, her expression focused but calm. "All right, team," Caleb said, turning to face them. "Let's do a final walkthrough before the big presentation. We've got this." Marcus gave a nod, but he could feel his heart racing. He sat at the computer and began running through the demo again, showing off the predictive capabilities of their AI. It worked perfectly. Everything from natural disaster predictions to stock market trends was generated seamlessly in seconds. He knew the system was impressive, but would they be able to convey that to their audience? The door to the lecture hall creaked open, and Professor Davis stepped in. His presence was enough to immediately put a damper on the room's energy. He stood silently at the back of the room, watching them rehearse. His gaze was intense, almost like he was evaluating every move, every word. Marcus took a deep breath and launched into his portion of the presentation. "Our AI system uses a unique set of algorithms that allow it to analyze vast amounts of data and predict future outcomes with remarkable accuracy. The beauty of this system is its ability to adapt to different types of scenarios, from economic forecasting to healthcare predictions." As he spoke, he could feel Professor Davis's eyes on him, studying his every word. His nerves flared up, but he pushed through. He had to stay focused. As he clicked through the demo, showcasing the real-time results of their predictions, he glanced over at Caleb, who was nodding approvingly. Olivia, who had been handling the slide transitions, spoke next. "This system not only predicts outcomes, but it also provides insights into how different variables can impact those outcomes. For example, if we adjust the parameters in a disaster simulation, the system shows us how the response changes based on different decisions. This makes it a powerful tool for decision-making in high-pressure situations." Emma added, her voice measured and calm, "Our code is designed for flexibility and scalability, meaning that it can be applied to a wide range of industries. It's a tool that grows with the data, learning and evolving to stay relevant." The room was silent as they finished their presentation. Marcus looked at his teammates, relieved that everything had gone smoothly. They had nailed it. It wasn't just the technical brilliance of their AI that would impress, it was how well they had communicated its potential. Professor Davis stepped forward, clapping his hands slowly. "Impressive," he said, his voice low. "The system is solid, and the presentation is well organized. But let's see how it works in front of an audience." The team exchanged nervous glances. They had one final hurdle to overcome, the actual presentation in front of the class and a panel of professors. The room filled with students as the time for their presentation drew near. Marcus could hear the chatter and feel the tension building. He was more than ready, but there was something about presenting to a room full of strangers that always made him second-guess himself. Finally, the moment arrived. Professor Davis stood at the front of the room, introducing their team. Marcus felt his throat dry up as he took a step forward. Emma, Olivia, and Caleb stood by his side, and together, they faced the panel of professors and the eager classmates. "Good luck," Olivia whispered to him just before they began. He nodded, taking a deep breath. They had come this far. All the late nights, the tense meetings, the arguments, and the breakthroughs, all of it had led them to this moment. It wasn't just about the grade anymore. It was about showing what they could do as a team, despite the odds. And as the first slide came up on the screen, Marcus felt a surge of confidence. This was their time. The room fell silent as Marcus stood in front of the crowd, the screen behind him flashing the first slide of their presentation. The faces of their classmates and professors stared back at him, some skeptical, some intrigued, but all expectant. His heart was pounding, but he steadied his breath, remembering all the hard work they had put in. This was the moment. They had prepared for this, and now, all they had to do was perform. Marcus glanced at his teammates, Emma, Caleb, and Olivia, standing by the presentation table, ready to back him up. He gave them a small, encouraging nod, and they returned it. He could feel the team's unity, that unspoken understanding between them, solidifying his resolve. "Good afternoon, everyone," Marcus began, his voice clear and steady. "My name is Marcus, and today we're going to show you our AI system designed to predict real-world scenarios, from natural disasters to social trends. This isn't just a system, it's a tool that will change how we make decisions, and we believe it has the potential to revolutionize industries." He gestured to the first slide, which showcased a simple diagram of the AI's architecture, highlighting the complex network of algorithms they had built. He explained the basic principles behind the system, walking the audience through its features, but he kept it simple. No need to overwhelm anyone with jargon. As he continued, he glanced briefly at the professors in the room. Most of them were nodding along, some scribbling notes. But one professor, a middle-aged man with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, seemed particularly unimpressed. His arms were crossed tightly, and his eyes were fixed on the screen with a skeptical air. "Let's see the system in action," Marcus said, feeling the weight of the moment. He hit a key on the keyboard, and the AI system came to life on the screen. The first demo showed a simulation of a natural disaster, an earthquake, to be precise, and how the AI could predict aftershocks, damage zones, and potential rescue needs. The results were displayed in real time, each change fluid and responsive. Marcus walked them through the demo, showing how the AI could adjust to different parameters in seconds. The room was quiet as the predictions flowed on the screen, with students and professors alike watching closely. "Impressive," a voice from the back of the room muttered, and Marcus caught sight of Professor Davis, who gave him an approving nod. But as the demo continued, Marcus noticed something odd. The AI, for reasons he couldn't immediately explain, began to glitch. The predictions, which had been smooth just moments before, started to jump erratically. The earthquake simulation was fine, but when they switched to the next scenario, social trends, the data output was all over the place, predicting absurd results. It was as though the system had momentarily lost its bearings. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He quickly clicked to another screen, trying to stabilize the data, but the glitch persisted. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, panic creeping up his spine. "What's going on?" Emma's voice came through from behind him, but he could tell she was as confused as he was. "Just give me a second," Marcus muttered, sweat starting to bead on his forehead. The seconds felt like hours. He glanced at the audience, and the skeptical professor was now leaning forward, his eyebrow arched. Caleb and Olivia stood silently, their faces tight with concern. Finally, Marcus spotted the issue, a missing link in the algorithm that had caused the system to fail when transitioning between different types of data. The AI was struggling to adapt to the change between disaster prediction and social trends, a subtle flaw they hadn't anticipated in their tests. Marcus quickly worked to fix it, but his heart was racing. He could feel his confidence slipping away with each passing second. The room was dead silent now, the tension palpable. "You're doing great, just keep it together," Olivia whispered from behind him. He didn't respond, too focused on fixing the problem. In one swift movement, Marcus adjusted the algorithm, rewiring the data flow. The glitching stopped, and the AI settled back into its smooth predictions. "It should work now," Marcus said, his voice tight. He hit enter, and this time, the system responded as expected. The social trend data began to display accurate, real-time predictions based on patterns in social media activity and online behavior. "Much better," Professor Davis called out, his voice steady but still carrying that hint of scrutiny. Marcus didn't know whether it was a compliment or just a cold observation. The room still felt tense. Marcus could tell that while the AI was working perfectly now, the earlier hiccup had shaken everyone, including the professors. "All right," Caleb said, stepping forward and taking over the presentation. "As you can see, the system can handle a variety of different scenarios, and with each new prediction, it learns and adapts. What makes it unique is not just its accuracy, but its flexibility. It's a tool that's designed to grow as data changes, making it applicable across industries, from government agencies handling disaster response, to businesses predicting market trends, to healthcare providers predicting patient needs. Emma continued, taking over the technical side. The algorithms are designed to process vast amounts of data without compromising speed. We've focused on scalability, making sure that the system works whether you're working with thousands of data points or billions. It's all about making the right decision at the right time. Marcus could feel the tension slowly lifting as his teammates explained the system's features in more detail. They were all pulling together, presenting a cohesive story that demonstrated both the power and the potential of the AI. The glitch was still fresh in his mind, but they had done their best to recover, and they were making their case. Finally, Olivia stepped up to close the presentation. In conclusion, this system is not just a collection of algorithms, it's a game changer. It's a tool that enables smarter, faster decision-making. It's an evolution in predictive analytics, and we believe it has the potential to impact every field from business to public safety. The room was quiet again as Olivia finished her statement, her voice calm but confident. Marcus felt a sense of relief wash over him. They had made it through. Professor Davis stood up slowly, his arms still crossed. I have to admit, this is impressive work. The presentation was solid, and the system's capabilities are clear. But I do want to know, why did it glitch during the transition? Can you guarantee that won't happen again? Marcus took a deep breath. That glitch was a result of a mismatch between the data sets, and it's something we've already addressed. It won't happen again, and if we were to continue developing this system, we would implement additional safeguards to ensure smooth transitions between scenarios. The professor nodded thoughtfully. Good. I'll take that into account. As the room began to clear out, Marcus could feel his nerves finally start to relax. They had made it through the presentation, and despite the glitch, it had gone well. He exchanged smiles with Emma, Caleb, and Olivia. They had worked through the tension, the glitches, and the nerves, and now, they could finally breathe. But as they packed up their things, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't just finished the project. Something inside him told him that this was only the beginning. Whatever came next, they had proven something far more important than just their technical abilities. They had proven that they could work together, adapt, and face challenges head-on. And that was just the first step. The dust had settled, but the tension still lingered in the air. The team filed out of the lecture hall, the weight of the presentation still on their shoulders. Marcus could feel his heart racing, but he was exhausted, physically and mentally. He had poured everything into this project, and while he knew the glitch had been a setback, there was still that lingering hope that they had impressed the right people. Marcus, a voice called, and he turned to see Professor Davis walking briskly toward him. The professor's face was unreadable, his expression as stern as ever, but there was something different in his eyes, curiosity, perhaps. Marcus's stomach tightened, wondering if the glitch had completely ruined their chances. Yes, Professor. Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. That was a solid presentation, Davis said, nodding once. But let me ask you something. Do you think your AI can handle real-time data, data that's constantly evolving and changing as quickly as we process it? Marcus blinked. I think so. We've designed it to be adaptable, to learn as it encounters new patterns. But real-time data is something we'd need to test further to optimize its response time. Davis's gaze didn't waver. You're on the right track, but you need to dig deeper. Real-time data means dealing with complexities you can't predict. And that's where the true potential of your AI lies, if you can get it to handle those rapid shifts seamlessly. Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing the professor's words. It wasn't just praise, but a challenge that would push him to improve and refine their work. You've got the foundation, Davis added. But I suggest you take it to the next level. If you're serious about this project, you need to keep refining it. If you're interested, I have some industry contacts who might want to see where you take this. But be prepared, what you're proposing isn't just an academic project. It's a tool that could change industries. And with that comes a lot of pressure. Marcus was stunned. Industry contacts, he repeated, not quite believing what he was hearing. You mean, like, real-world companies? Davis smiled, a rare, almost imperceptible smile. Yes, real-world companies. But you'll need to step up your game. Keep pushing this project beyond the classroom. As Davis walked away, Marcus stood frozen in place. His heart was racing again, but this time, it was excitement, not fear. This was the opportunity they had all been waiting for. Their work could go beyond the lecture hall, beyond the grade, it could change the way industries operated. But what would it take to get there? He turned to find Emma, Caleb, and Olivia standing nearby, watching him with wide eyes. They had clearly overheard the conversation. Did he really just say industry contacts? Caleb asked, his voice filled with disbelief. Marcus could hardly believe it himself. Yes, he did. And it sounds like he's serious. But he also wants us to take it to the next level. We can't just leave it as it is. Olivia's expression was thoughtful. We've been working so hard already, but if we refine the system, if we really take it to the next level like Professor Davis said, imagine what we could accomplish. What if this is our shot at something big? Emma was silent for a moment, her face unreadable, before she nodded. I agree. This isn't just about finishing the project anymore. It's about making a difference. We've got the potential, and now we just need to push further. Marcus felt a rush of pride in his teammates. They were all on the same page. They were ready to take the leap. The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights, constant debugging, and brainstorming sessions. They kept refining the AI, testing it with real-time data, applying it to even more complex scenarios. The glitches had become less frequent, but they still weren't perfect. Every time they thought they had solved one problem, another challenge presented itself. But they kept going. One evening, after a particularly grueling coding session, Marcus found himself staring at the screen, bleary-eyed and exhausted. The real-time data feature still wasn't working as smoothly as they wanted, and it felt like they were running in circles. He rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of the project on his shoulders. Why isn't this working? He muttered to himself. Emma, who had been working beside him, leaned over and glanced at the screen. It's the data integration, she said. We're not accounting for the volume fluctuations in real-time feeds. We need to factor in the way real-time data increases in complexity. Marcus blinked, processing her words. You're right. We didn't anticipate the sheer volume that real-time data would generate, especially when it's coming from multiple sources at once. Olivia, who had been brainstorming ideas for their upcoming presentation to the industry contacts, looked up. What if we used a hybrid approach? Combining both machine learning and deep learning to handle the complexity? Marcus paused, considering the idea. A hybrid approach. That could work. We could improve the system's ability to adjust to different types of data in real time. Caleb, who had been reviewing the system's overall architecture, chimed in. If we add a real-time feedback loop into the AI, we can allow it to continuously learn from incoming data while adjusting predictions as they're processed. They all exchanged looks of excitement. It was a breakthrough. They had a plan. And for the first time in weeks, Marcus felt like they were finally heading in the right direction. Weeks passed as the team worked tirelessly, incorporating their new ideas into the AI. With every update, it grew stronger, more capable, and more adaptable. They tested it on everything from real-time stock market predictions to emergency response systems during live simulations. The system, once plagued with glitches, now ran almost flawlessly, with the ability to adjust to changing data without faltering. They were ready. The day arrived when they would present their final, refined version of the AI to the industry contacts Professor Davis had arranged for them to meet. Their hearts pounded with anticipation as they entered the sleek conference room, the space buzzing with professionals from various fields, corporate executives, tech developers, and industry experts. Marcus stood at the front of the room, feeling the pressure building up again. This was it. The moment they had been working toward. "Good afternoon, everyone," he began, his voice steady, though his nerves were still evident. "Today, we're here to show you a tool that we believe can change the way industries handle real-time data. Our AI system is designed not only to predict outcomes but to adapt as data evolves." As he continued with the presentation, he felt the room's attention shift. The system was working flawlessly now, no glitches, no hiccups. The real-time data integration, the hybrid learning approach, it was all coming together perfectly. As the presentation came to a close, Marcus looked up, his eyes meeting the faces of the industry experts. They were silent, studying the data, processing the information. Finally, one of the executives stood up and smiled. "Impressive. This is exactly the kind of innovation we're looking for." The team exchanged stunned glances, but Marcus felt a wave of relief and pride wash over him. They had made it. And the future was brighter than they could have ever imagined. The weeks following the presentation were a blur of excitement, congratulations, and newfound opportunities. Marcus and his teammates had never imagined their project would gain this much attention. The industry executives they had presented to were enthusiastic, offering both praise and suggestions for improvement. Several companies expressed interest in collaborating, while others simply wanted to know when they could expect to see a working prototype ready for deployment. For Marcus, it felt surreal. Just a few months ago, he was an underestimated student, struggling to prove his worth. Now, he was leading a team that was on the cusp of something groundbreaking. They had successfully navigated the glitch, perfected their system, and captured the attention of some of the most influential people in the tech world. But with success came pressure, and more obstacles. As the days passed, Marcus spent long hours working with the industry contacts, negotiating deals, and refining the AI system based on the feedback they had received. He was constantly in meetings, balancing between technical development and business strategy. It was a lot to handle, but he found a new sense of purpose. This wasn't just about getting a good grade anymore, this was about changing the world. But with all the excitement came a nagging feeling. Marcus couldn't shake the pressure that now weighed on his shoulders. His team had been working tirelessly to make their AI flawless, but every time they thought they had solved one problem, another would emerge. The more they refined the system, the more complex the issues became. There were glitches they hadn't foreseen, real-time data inputs that didn't sync perfectly, and technical limitations that couldn't be ignored. It felt like a never-ending cycle. One afternoon, after a particularly long meeting with potential investors, Marcus found himself walking through the campus courtyard, his mind swirling with thoughts. He was exhausted. He had barely seen his friends outside of the team meetings, and he hadn't had a moment to just breathe in days. "Marcus," a voice called, snapping him out of his thoughts. He turned to see Emma jogging toward him, her face lit up with that familiar excitement that always seemed to energize him. "Hey," he said, forcing a smile. "What's up?" "I wanted to talk," she said, her voice serious but warm. "You've been working yourself into the ground lately. You need a break." "We all do." Marcus sighed. "I know. It's just, there's so much riding on this. I can't afford to let things slip up now." "I get it," Emma said, her tone softening. "But we need to take care of ourselves, too. Remember what you said to me a few weeks ago? That we're in this together. Well, we need to stick to that. We're a team. We've come this far because of how we've worked together." Marcus looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. She was right. He had been so focused on the next step, on impressing everyone, that he had lost sight of the importance of balance. He had lost sight of why they were doing this in the first place. "I've just been so caught up in everything," Marcus admitted. "But you're right. We do need to stick together. I'll take a step back, take a break." Emma smiled. "Good. I'll hold you to that." Just then, Caleb and Olivia appeared, walking toward them with cups of coffee in hand. "Hey, what's going on?" Caleb asked, grinning. "Marcus is finally going to take a break," Emma teased. Olivia raised an eyebrow. "Is it safe to say that you're not working yourself to the bone anymore?" Marcus chuckled, feeling the tension in his shoulders loosen a little. "I guess so. I've been running on empty for way too long. It's time to hit reset for a bit." "Good call," Olivia said, handing him a coffee. "You deserve it." They all sat down on a bench in the courtyard, sipping their drinks and talking about everything except the project. It felt nice to have a moment of peace, to just talk about life and the future instead of algorithms and data streams. "So, what's next for us?" Caleb asked, stretching his legs out. "We've got the attention of the industry, but we still have a lot of work to do, right?" Marcus nodded, but this time, he felt a sense of clarity he hadn't had in weeks. "Yeah. We've made it this far, but we're not done yet. We need to keep refining the system, get it ready for real-world applications. But now that we've got some breathing room, we can tackle it from a fresh perspective. We can't let the pressure make us forget what we're really building here." Olivia smiled. "Exactly. It's easy to get caught up in the hype. But at the end of the day, it's about the work we're doing and how it will impact the world." The conversation drifted to other topics as the afternoon sun began to set, and for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt like he could finally exhale. He had been running non-stop for so long that he had forgotten to appreciate the journey. Yes, the pressure was immense, and the challenges ahead were greater than ever, but he wasn't alone in this anymore. He had a team that believed in him, just as he believed in them. That night, Marcus found himself back in the lab, but this time, he wasn't overwhelmed. He sat down in front of the computer with a new sense of purpose. The system they had created wasn't perfect, but that was okay. There was always room for improvement. They had a vision, and they would make it happen. But as he typed away, a new email notification popped up on his screen. The subject line read, "Urgent, new opportunity." He opened the email, his eyes scanning the message. It was from one of the executives who had been at the presentation. They were interested in a partnership, but it wasn't just any partnership. They wanted to integrate Marcus's AI into their company's infrastructure. They were offering funding, resources, and access to real-world data in exchange for collaboration. Marcus's heart raced. This was the opportunity they had dreamed of, but it came with a catch. The email mentioned that the timeline for integration was aggressive. They would have to hit the ground running. The pressure would be even higher. He sat back in his chair, staring at the screen, weighing the possibilities. This was the moment that could define everything for him and his team. The future had just opened up, but with it came a new set of challenges. His phone buzzed, and he saw a message from Emma, "What's the next big move?" Marcus smiled to himself, typing back quickly, "We keep moving forward. We've got this." He hit send and looked back at the email, knowing that whatever came next, they were ready. They had each other, and that was the most important thing. The following weeks felt like a whirlwind. Marcus had barely had time to catch his breath, let alone reflect on how far they had come. Their AI system was about to be integrated into a major corporation's infrastructure. The deal they had secured with the industry executives had turned into something far bigger than any of them had anticipated. The company, Global Tech, was one of the leading players in the tech world, and they were placing their faith in Marcus and his team. But as the days passed, Marcus couldn't help but feel the pressure building. It was no longer just about their university project or impressing a few industry professionals. This was real-world application, real money, real deadlines, and real consequences. Failure was not an option. The team gathered in the lab late one evening, surrounded by coffee cups, empty takeout boxes, and stacks of notes. They had been working non-stop for days, preparing for the integration, fine-tuning their AI, and reviewing the specifics of Global Tech's system requirements. "This is it," Emma said, her voice tinged with both excitement and apprehension as she stood by the whiteboard. She'd been the one to handle most of the communication with the company, and now the pressure of making sure everything went smoothly was weighing on her. "The integration is scheduled for next week. We need everything to work perfectly." Marcus nodded, but even as he spoke, he felt a tight knot in his stomach. "We've come so far, but we can't afford to miss anything now. The real-time data integration has to work flawlessly. If it doesn't..." "It will work," Caleb interrupted, his voice filled with quiet confidence. He had spent countless hours reviewing the system's performance, ensuring that it could handle everything Global Tech would throw at it. "We've got the foundation. Now, we just need to optimize." Olivia, ever the pragmatist, looked at Marcus and the team. "It's not just about technical optimization. We have to be prepared for the human side of things too. There's going to be a learning curve for the people using the system. They'll need training, support, and maybe some hand-holding at first." Marcus nodded, grateful for Olivia's clear-eyed perspective. "Right. We'll need a deployment plan. We can't just give them the system and hope it works. We have to be there every step of the way." As the team continued discussing the logistics, Marcus's mind kept drifting back to the pressure they were under. Global Tech wasn't just any company, it was a giant in the industry. If they succeeded, they'd have the opportunity to work with even bigger companies. But if they failed, well, the consequences didn't bear thinking about. His mind kept returning to the same question: what if they weren't ready? The week before the integration, Marcus had little time to think about anything other than their work. They spent every waking hour preparing, tweaking, testing, and debugging. But even as they ran tests, they encountered issues they hadn't anticipated. The data that Global Tech had provided wasn't as clean as they had hoped. There were discrepancies, missing pieces, and even conflicting formats. They had to rewrite large portions of their code to accommodate these new challenges. Marcus knew they had no choice but to push through. The deadline was non-negotiable. The team worked in shifts, hardly pausing to eat or sleep. When they weren't in the lab, they were on video calls with Global Tech's engineers, working out details and troubleshooting issues in real time. On the eve of the integration, Marcus found himself standing in front of the mirror in the bathroom of their rented apartment. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, his face drawn from the stress. He took a deep breath, staring at his reflection. Was he really ready for this? Was he really the right person to lead this team? As he stood there, lost in thought, Emma knocked softly on the door. "Marcus?" Her voice was gentle, almost hesitant. "Can we talk?" Marcus opened the door and found Emma standing there, her face weary but determined. "What's up?" "I know we're all under a lot of pressure," she said, her voice low. "But I just wanted to remind you that we're a team. You don't have to carry all of this by yourself." Marcus didn't know what to say. The weight of the project, of their futures, felt heavier than ever. But hearing Emma's words reminded him that he wasn't alone. He looked at her and gave a small nod. "I know," he said softly. "I guess I've just been so focused on making sure everything goes perfectly. But I shouldn't be carrying all of it. We're in this together." Emma smiled, her expression softening. "Exactly. We've all put in the work. We've all made sacrifices to get here. And we're going to see this through, together." Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the pressure lift just a little. "Thanks, Emma." She nodded. "We've got this. I believe in us." The next morning, the team gathered for the final run-through before the integration. Marcus stood at the head of the table, looking at his teammates. Their eyes were focused, determination clear in their expressions. Despite the exhaustion, there was a sense of purpose in the room. They were ready. "All right," Marcus said, his voice steady. "This is it. We've worked so hard to get here. We're going to face challenges, we're going to run into issues, but we've got the skills and the determination to handle whatever comes our way. We don't stop until we've made this the best it can be. Let's go show the world what we can do." The team nodded, their resolve firm. It wasn't just about the technology anymore. It was about proving to themselves, and to the world, that they could do it. Together. The day of the integration arrived. The team gathered in the conference room at Global Tech's headquarters, their laptops open, their minds sharp. They were ready to deploy their AI system into the company's infrastructure. As the clock ticked down to the moment of truth, Marcus felt a rush of nervous excitement. He had prepared for this day, but nothing could prepare him for the reality of standing at the crossroads of success or failure. "All right, team," Emma said, her voice calm and steady. "Let's do this." They started the integration process, their eyes glued to the screens, watching every detail unfold. The system connected, the data began to flow in real time, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. But then, a warning message appeared on the screen. A collective gasp echoed through the room. The integration wasn't going as planned. Something had gone wrong. The team's heart sank. "Let's troubleshoot," Caleb said quickly, his hands flying over the keyboard. Marcus's mind raced. This wasn't happening. Not now. But as he watched the team spring into action, he realized something important. They weren't panicking. They weren't giving up. They were solving the problem, just like they always had. "We can fix this," Marcus said, his voice firm. The team worked quickly and methodically, diving into the issue. They isolated the cause, a discrepancy in the data format, and worked to patch it. The minutes ticked by, and every second felt like an eternity. Finally, after what felt like hours, the system stabilized. The AI was running smoothly, handling the real-time data with precision. Marcus let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. They had done it. "Well done," Emma said, smiling. "We did it." Marcus looked at his team, his heart swelling with pride. They had faced the pressure, the uncertainty, and the obstacles, and they had overcome them. This was just the beginning. In the days following the successful integration, the team at Global Tech couldn't stop talking about Marcus and his team's AI system. The system was performing flawlessly, and everyone in the company was excited about the possibilities it offered. But as the news of their success spread, so did the pressure to deliver even more. Marcus was beginning to understand just how much their breakthrough was shifting the landscape. What had started as a university project had quickly transformed into something much larger, a product with the potential to revolutionize an entire industry. With that potential came expectations. And with those expectations came new challenges. The first challenge reared its head when Global Tech's head of operations, a sharp and demanding woman named Elizabeth Haynes, called a meeting with Marcus and his team. "We've been getting a lot of attention from both the press and other industry leaders," she began, her tone no nonsense as she sat across from them. "But with all this attention comes a critical issue. You've proven the technology works. But now, it needs to scale. Fast." Marcus exchanged a quick glance with Emma, who was sitting next to him. The room felt suddenly much smaller, as if the weight of the conversation had compressed the air around them. "Scaling is no easy feat," Elizabeth continued, her voice unwavering. "We need your system to be able to handle millions of transactions per second. The current prototype, as impressive as it is, won't cut it for long. We need to develop it further, and we need to do it quickly. The competition is already catching up." Marcus's stomach tightened. He had known this was coming, but hearing it laid out so bluntly made it real. They weren't just working to impress a few execs anymore. They were in a race to stay ahead of the curve and prove that their AI could evolve. "Can we handle it?" Elizabeth asked, her gaze focused on Marcus. "I know you've got a talented team, but I need to know if you can handle the pressure." Marcus took a deep breath, looking around the room at his team. They had worked tirelessly to get this far, and now they had to face an even bigger challenge. He wasn't sure what the next few weeks would hold, but he knew they had the skills. And, more importantly, they had the drive. "We can handle it," Marcus said, his voice steady. "We've come this far, and we won't stop now." Elizabeth seemed to consider this for a moment before nodding. "Good. We'll give you the resources you need to scale the system, but the timeline is non-negotiable. The industry is moving fast. We'll expect results." With that, the meeting was over, but the weight of her words lingered. Marcus knew this wasn't just a technical challenge, this was a test of their ability to adapt, to think on their feet, and to overcome hurdles they hadn't even anticipated. They had been thrown into the deep end, and now it was up to them to swim. As the days passed, the pressure began to build. The team worked around the clock, developing new algorithms, refining the system's architecture, and testing it under extreme conditions. Every breakthrough was followed by another setback. The scaling was not as simple as they had hoped. The data inputs were becoming more complex, the demands more unpredictable. Late one night, as Marcus sat in front of his laptop, the familiar hum of the lab buzzing around him, he felt a moment of doubt. He had pushed himself and his team to the limit, but they were still facing challenges that seemed impossible to overcome. The system wasn't scaling as expected. They were hitting bottlenecks they couldn't easily solve, and it was taking a toll on everyone's morale. Emma was the first to notice his frustration. She entered the lab, where Marcus was typing away furiously, looking for a solution to the latest issue. "Marcus," she said softly, sitting beside him. "I know we're all feeling the pressure, but this isn't the way. We need a break. We need to step away from this for a little while." Marcus paused, looking at the screen. The code was a mess. No matter what tweaks he made, nothing seemed to be working. He wanted to ignore Emma's advice, but he knew she was right. The stress was starting to affect his focus. They needed a fresh perspective, and maybe, just maybe, they needed to step away from the problem for a while to see it with new eyes. "I don't know how to stop," Marcus admitted, the weight of it all sinking in. "Every time we think we're close to a breakthrough, something else goes wrong. And the clock's ticking." Emma put a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We've done a lot. We've achieved so much already. But we won't make it if we burn ourselves out. Just step away for a night. Tomorrow, we come back to it. You'll see things differently." Marcus looked at her, his mind racing. She was right, of course. They couldn't solve everything in one night. Sometimes the best way forward was to take a step back and let their minds breathe. He sighed, finally relenting. "All right," he said. "One night. But tomorrow, we go all in again." The next day, after a full night's rest, the team came back together. They'd all taken Emma's advice, taking time to recharge and clear their minds. When they sat down at the table, there was a renewed sense of focus and energy in the air. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling more centered than he had in days. "All right, team. Let's take this one step at a time. We've come this far, and we're not backing down now." With that, they dove back into the project, this time with a new approach. They broke down the problem into smaller chunks, tackling each issue methodically instead of trying to solve everything at once. Slowly but surely, they began to make progress. The scaling issue wasn't resolved overnight, but they finally started to see solutions emerge. After hours of work, Marcus sat back in his chair, eyes tired but satisfied. The system was beginning to scale properly. They had identified and fixed the bottlenecks, and the AI was finally running smoothly under high-demand conditions. Emma grinned, crossing her arms. See? Told you taking a break was the right call. Marcus smiled, grateful for her wisdom. You were right. I needed to step back. Sometimes, the best way forward is just to slow down. It wasn't the end of the journey. The pressure was still there, and the team knew that their work was far from finished. But for the first time in days, Marcus felt like they were on the right path. They had overcome the first hurdle. The next steps would come, but for now, they could breathe. As the days went on, Marcus found that the more they accomplished, the greater the challenges became. But for every problem they solved, they grew stronger as a team. They weren't just building an AI anymore, they were building a legacy. And as the project continued to gain momentum, one thing became clear: the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But with his team by his side, Marcus knew they could take on whatever came next. It was just a few weeks after the team had successfully scaled their AI system that Marcus began to sense something unsettling in the air. The buzz from the press and industry leaders had intensified. Global tech was singing their praises, and Marcus and his team were gaining unprecedented attention. The future looked bright. But Marcus had always known that when things seemed too good to be true, there was usually something lurking in the shadows. He didn't have to wait long to find out what it was. It started with a sudden email one morning, a confidential memo from Global Tech's top executives, marked with high-priority urgency. The email outlined a new competitor in the market, Nexatech, a tech giant that had been keeping a low profile until now. Marcus skimmed the message quickly, the words sinking in with increasing dread. Nexatech had developed a competing AI system, one that seemed to match their own in capabilities, and in some ways, even exceeded it. The company had been quietly testing its system in various sectors, and now they were ramping up to launch it. According to the email, Nexatech was actively working with several of Global Tech's most important clients. This wasn't just competition. This was a threat. Marcus, check this out, Caleb said, walking over to Marcus's desk, a tense expression on his face. He had a tablet in his hand, displaying a news article that had just been released. Marcus read it quickly. Nexatech's new AI system. It's making waves. They've got connections, Caleb continued, his voice tight. Big names in the tech industry are already backing them. If they're coming after our clients, we've got a serious problem on our hands. Marcus felt his stomach twist. Nexatech wasn't just another startup looking for a spot in the market. This was a powerhouse. The idea that they could quickly take clients away from Global Tech, and by extension, from Marcus's team, was terrifying. Emma entered the room, her eyes narrowing when she saw the article. I knew it. When the industry starts noticing us, there's always someone ready to pull the rug out from under us. I don't know if it's that simple, Marcus said, trying to stay calm. We've faced tough competition before, but this feels different. They have resources, connections we don't have. Maybe, Emma said, crossing her arms, but what we have is innovation. And if we keep pushing forward, we can stay ahead. We can't let them intimidate us. Caleb gave a rueful smile. I'd say, don't mess with the underdogs, but that's probably what they're saying about us now. Marcus nodded slowly, trying to maintain focus. The truth was, he didn't know what the next steps were. He'd always prided himself on staying ahead of the curve, but this time, it felt like they were playing catch-up. But there was something else Marcus had learned along the way: doubt was a luxury they couldn't afford. They'd made it this far by being relentless, by never backing down. Now, they had to be even more relentless. We need to dig deeper, Marcus said finally, his tone determined. Let's see what we're up against. We're not going to let them take us down without a fight. That afternoon, the team met with Global Tech's executives again. This time, the stakes were even higher. Elizabeth Haynes, Global Tech's head of operations, looked at them with a grave expression. We've been in talks with Nexatech for the last few days, she began, her tone direct. They're offering clients similar AI technology, and they've undercut us on pricing. They've already reached out to some of our biggest clients, including those in our prime sectors, finance, healthcare, and telecommunications. The room fell silent. Marcus's mind raced, considering the implications. Global tech had worked hard to establish themselves as leaders in their field, and now they were being threatened by a new competitor, one that seemed to be coming out of nowhere with an impressive system. "We're going to need to step up our game," Elizabeth continued, her voice firm. "Nexitech has the advantage of being new and flashy. But we know the market. And we have a partnership with you, Marcus and your team. What I need from you is more innovation. I need you to help us figure out how we stay ahead." Marcus exchanged a glance with his team. This was it. They were in the midst of a corporate battle, and the game had just changed. "We're on it," Marcus said, his voice steady. "We'll need more resources, more time to work on a solution, but we can make this happen." Elizabeth nodded. "I'll get you what you need. But time is critical. The faster we get ahead of them, the better." As the meeting ended and the team filed out of the conference room, the reality of the situation started to sink in. The competition wasn't just about algorithms and data anymore. This was a battle for corporate survival, and Marcus's team was now firmly in the crosshairs. They needed to find a way to out-innovate Nexitech, and fast. "I don't know about you guys," Olivia said as they gathered back in the lab, "but I'm ready to kick this into high gear. We've faced worse. We just need to think smarter." "That's the plan," Marcus replied. "We've already got something special with our AI. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to push the boundaries. We need a feature or update that will blow them out of the water. But we have to be careful," Emma added. "We don't want to rush something out without thoroughly testing it. We can't afford to make any mistakes now." Marcus nodded. "We'll prioritize quality, but we'll also need to innovate. We can't sit back and wait for them to make the next move." Caleb looked up from his computer screen. "We could start by focusing on the scalability of our system. Nexitech's AI is impressive, but their system has limitations. What if we made ours more adaptable across industries, so that we're not just competing with them in one space, but across several?" "Exactly," Marcus said. "Let's make this bigger than what we initially imagined. Let's give clients a reason to choose us, not just because we're cheaper, but because we're better." The team got to work immediately, brainstorming, strategizing, and running new tests. The hours stretched late into the night, the tension in the room palpable. But despite the mounting pressure, Marcus felt something different, a sense of determination. They weren't going down without a fight. As the team worked, Marcus's mind kept returning to something that had always driven him: innovation. It wasn't just about the technology. It was about creating something that truly changed the game. Something that would make their competitors wish they had never come to the table. They had already built something impressive. Now it was time to make it extraordinary. The weeks following the announcement of Nexitech's launch were tense, to say the least. The pressure on Marcus and his team to deliver something groundbreaking was greater than ever before. Each day felt like a race against time, as they pushed their AI system to its limits, trying to make improvements and innovations that would give global tech the edge they desperately needed. However, as the team worked late into the nights, the atmosphere in the lab grew heavier. They could feel Nexitech closing in, not just in terms of their technology, but in their ability to disrupt the market. It was no longer just a battle of algorithms, it had become a high-stakes game of corporate warfare. Every new challenge they faced seemed more difficult than the last, and with every breakthrough, another obstacle appeared, threatening to derail their progress. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, and it came from an unlikely source. It was Caleb, always the one who approached problems with a blend of creativity and methodical thinking, who made the connection. As the team worked tirelessly to improve their system's scalability, Caleb suggested they not just focus on optimization, but also think about personalization. The idea was simple yet revolutionary. Instead of just improving the performance of their AI system, they could make it more adaptable, more intuitive to the unique needs of different industries and clients. Think about it, Caleb said, his voice tinged with excitement. We've been making it work better in the general sense, but what if we start making it more tailored to individual clients' needs? Not just in terms of speed or efficiency, but customization. Each industry has its quirks, its specific demands. If we could make our AI system smart enough to adjust based on the client's requirements, automatically, we would blow Nexatech out of the water. The idea seemed almost too simple, but the more Marcus and Emma considered it, the more they realized how revolutionary it could be. While Nexatech was pushing out a one-size-fits-all solution, they could provide a system that adapts to every client, learns from their data, and customizes the approach in real time. It was a level of flexibility that Nexatech's AI couldn't compete with. I think this is it, Marcus said, his voice filled with renewed energy. If we do this right, we'll be the only ones offering this kind of personalized solution. We need to act fast. The team didn't waste any time. They worked round the clock to develop the new feature, a dynamic, real-time customization layer that would allow clients to tailor the AI's functionality to their unique needs. It wasn't easy, and there were plenty of bumps along the way. Some features didn't work as expected, while others required more resources than anticipated. But the team was determined. They understood that the clock was ticking, and with every passing day, Nexatech was getting closer. As they neared completion, Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at what they had accomplished. They had started this journey as a small team of innovators with a bold idea. Now, they were creating a system that could truly change the game. But the real test was still ahead. The feature was nearly ready, but Marcus knew that simply having the technology wasn't enough. They needed to present it to Global Tech's clients in a way that would make them see the immense value it provided. The competition was fierce, and one mistake could cost them everything. The day arrived for the big presentation. Marcus stood before a room full of the company's top executives and several key clients, his heart pounding in his chest. Emma, Caleb, and Olivia stood by his side, offering silent support as he prepared to unveil the AI's latest feature. This was it, the moment that could decide whether they would remain ahead of the curve or fall behind. We've developed something truly unique, Marcus began, his voice steady despite the nerves racing through him. Our new feature will allow your systems to adjust dynamically to the specific needs of your business. Whether you're in finance, healthcare, or telecommunications, the AI will adapt in real time to improve your processes, streamline your operations, and provide deeper insights. As he spoke, he could see the executives and clients leaning forward, intrigued. This was what they had been waiting for, a solution that wasn't just a blanket fix for all industries, but one that was specifically tailored to each of their unique needs. Marcus went on to demonstrate how the system worked in real time. He showed how it could instantly adapt to various data sets, how it could analyze customer behavior, and how it could forecast trends with impressive accuracy. The room was silent as the system flawlessly adjusted itself to each scenario. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. "It's incredible," one of the clients said, shaking Marcus's hand. "This is exactly what we've been looking for. A product that works for us, not just for the industry as a whole." Marcus's heart swelled with pride, but he knew that the work wasn't over yet. This was just the beginning. He had to convince Global Tech's leadership that they had something truly game-changing on their hands. That evening, after the presentation, Marcus and his team gathered in the lab. The adrenaline of the day had worn off, leaving them exhausted but elated. They had pulled it off. They had shown their clients the power of what they had created. "Looks like we did it," Olivia said, her voice filled with relief. "We still have a lot of work to do," Emma reminded them. "This is just the first step. Nexatech won't give up that easily." Marcus nodded. He knew the battle wasn't over. But at that moment, something had shifted. They had proven themselves. They had given their clients something valuable, something new, and they had shown the world that they could compete with the giants. "We're not finished yet," Marcus said, his voice firm. "We've got more work ahead of us, but we're in this together. And we're going to keep pushing until we get everything we've earned." In the days that followed, Nexatech made their move, launching an aggressive marketing campaign aimed at poaching Global Tech's clients. But the feedback from Global Tech's clients was overwhelming. The personalized, adaptable nature of Marcus's AI system had given them something Nexatech couldn't. It wasn't just about price or speed. It was about a solution that understood their unique challenges and adapted to them. By the end of the month, Global Tech had secured several key contracts that Nexatech had been targeting. Their clients had seen the value of Marcus's system, and they weren't willing to let it go. It was clear, Marcus and his team had won this round. As Marcus stood in the lab, looking out at his team, he felt a sense of accomplishment he hadn't known in years. They had done it, they had faced down their competition and come out on top. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Marcus felt confident. They were no longer just underdogs trying to survive in the tech world. They were innovators, leaders, and visionaries. They had something no one else had, a unique, adaptable solution that could change the future of industries across the globe. And they weren't done yet. The victory was sweet, but Marcus knew that the euphoria wouldn't last long. It never did in the tech world. Every success only led to new expectations, new challenges. For a moment, however, they allowed themselves to revel in what they had accomplished. The AI system they developed had given Global Tech the edge it needed to fend off Nexatech's aggressive moves. Their clients were happy. The future seemed bright. But the future, as Marcus had learned time and again, could be an unpredictable beast. One evening, just days after the successful presentation, Marcus received an unexpected call. It was from Elizabeth Haynes, the head of operations at Global Tech, the one who had been Marcus's biggest supporter from the start. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that sent a chill through him. "Marcus, we need to talk. It's about the next step," she began. Marcus's brow furrowed. "Next step? What do you mean?" There was a long pause. Then Elizabeth said, "We've been approached by some high-level investors who want to take things to the next level. Global Tech has always been a leader in AI, but they're looking for more innovation. They want something different. Something new." Marcus's pulse quickened. He could tell she wasn't just talking about a minor update. This was big. This was the kind of move that could reshape everything. "What are they suggesting?" Marcus asked, his voice tight. "They want to buy out the division you're working on. They want full control of the team and the technology. In exchange, they're offering a major investment. We're talking about a serious expansion." Marcus felt a wave of confusion hit him. He had built this system with his team, every line of code, every decision, every late-night meeting. Now, someone wanted to take it from him? "You're asking me to give up control?" Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. "To let someone else take charge of what we've worked for?" Elizabeth's tone softened. "It's not just about control, Marcus. This is about the future of the company. They want to see this technology scaled, deployed globally. You and your team have done great work, but they believe with more resources, you could do so much more. We could do so much more." Marcus was silent for a long moment, weighing the options. On one hand, the investment was tempting. It would mean more funding, more resources, more opportunities for growth. On the other hand, it felt like a betrayal. He had built something that was his, something that was theirs. And now, the future of his team, his work, was in the hands of faceless investors who might not have the same vision or commitment. "I'll need some time to think about it," Marcus finally said, his voice steady. "Take all the time you need," Elizabeth replied. "But I need an answer soon. The investors are pressing. As he hung up, Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. It was the hardest decision he had ever faced. On one hand, the future of the technology, and of his team, could be secured with the investors' backing. On the other, there was a fear of losing everything that had made this journey worthwhile. The creative freedom, the sense of purpose, and the tight-knit bond they'd forged in the lab. The next morning, Marcus called a meeting with Emma, Caleb, and Olivia. They gathered in the conference room, their faces a mixture of anticipation and concern. Marcus could see the worry in their eyes, and he knew they sensed something was wrong. "Look, I've just received an offer from Global Tech as investors," Marcus began, getting straight to the point. "They want to buy out our division. They're offering a major investment, but the price is high. They want full control over the technology, the team, everything." A heavy silence filled the room. Caleb was the first to speak. "That's a lot to take in." Olivia leaned forward, her expression serious. "What does that mean for us, Marcus? If we take the deal, do we lose control over what we've built?" "I'm not sure," Marcus admitted. "Elizabeth says it's about scaling the technology, getting it to a global stage. But what if we lose our autonomy? What if they change everything we've worked for?" Emma's eyes flickered with concern. "But what if this is the opportunity we've been waiting for? What if this investment is the key to making the impact we've always dreamed of? We've been running on fumes for months now, and as much as I love what we've built, we don't have the resources to take it any further on our own." Marcus nodded. He understood Emma's point. The team had been working with limited resources for so long. The opportunity to scale and grow had always seemed just out of reach. This could be the lifeline they needed. But there was still that nagging fear in the back of his mind. The fear of losing the essence of what made their work special. Caleb leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "I get both sides. But the reality is, this is a big decision. If we sign away control, it's not just about us anymore. It's about the future of our technology, and about what kind of company we want to be. Do we want to play by the investors' rules, or do we want to keep pushing boundaries on our terms?" The room fell silent again as they each considered the weight of Caleb's words. "I don't know what the right answer is," Marcus said quietly, looking at his team. "But we need to decide. We either take the deal and try to scale this thing to a global level, or we stay independent, fight for the autonomy we have, and risk the chance of being swallowed up by bigger companies. Either way, it's a huge risk." Olivia spoke up, her voice calm but firm. "What matters is what we value most. Do we want to keep our vision intact, or do we want to let someone else take control?" The decision was agonizing, but in the end, Marcus knew what he had to do. It wasn't just about the money or the resources. It was about the team, the mission, and the work they had done together. They had created something incredible, something they all believed in. The thought of losing that to faceless investors was more than he could bear. After a long and difficult conversation, Marcus made his decision. "I'm going to decline the offer," he said, his voice resolute. "We've come this far on our own. And I believe we can continue on our own, too. We have something unique here, and I'm not ready to let anyone take that away from us." Emma, Caleb, and Olivia nodded, their expressions a mix of relief and pride. They understood. They were in this together, and they would face whatever came next, side by side. The decision to reject the investor's offer was a bold one, but it was the right one. They had built something extraordinary, and now, they would fight to keep it that way. The road ahead was uncertain, but Marcus knew one thing for sure: as long as they stayed true to their vision, they could overcome anything. In the end, they weren't just building an AI system. They were building a legacy. And that was something worth fighting for. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?